Brooke, you're not getting a combative Boeing. They're listening. They know they've got to respond. They know they've got to fix it. I want to give you credit. You came out early and talked about the culture, that something was wrong within this company. What are we learning from the regulator and the people conducting this review?
I think, to your point, they are saying the right things now, but it would have meant a lot more if they had been saying this earlier. And they had plenty of opportunity to do that in the wake of the two MAX crashes. And I think what's important to note here is this report was started in March 2023. They didn't start this investigation into Boeing safety practices because of what happened with Alaska Airlines. That was a symptom of a culture that is just lacking. And when you read this, the crux of it is really, how do you figure out how to get bad news to the people that can do something about it before it morphs into a crisis? How do you flag problems before you have something like Alaska Airlines happen? And this just goes back to the basics of how you run a manufacturing company. It shouldn't be that hard, but I think in practice, it is, not just for Boeing, but for some of these other companies that have sort of lost sight of what they really do, and that is manufacture products. I think about GE a lot just because these companies do share so much overlap from their executives over the years. And you look at the transformation under that company, and CEO Larry Culp is known for being extremely hands-on, for being very invested in what happens on his factory floors. At Boeing, Dave Calhoun is known for being the opposite, of being more hands-off. I don't know if that's what Boeing needs right now. I think you really need somebody to get in there and to pay attention to what's happening with these manufacturing processes, because I think the people at the factories pay attention to that. They pay attention to what the executives are saying and what they're doing. And when you move your headquarters to Arlington, Virginia, even further away from that 737 factory outside of Seattle, I do think that sent a message.
Interesting. So, Brooke, let's talk about personnel. Tell us about the changes that have happened and the changes that you'd anticipate to happen in the coming weeks and months.
At Boeing specifically, I think, there's been a number of different changes. If you look, sort of over the time period in the wake of the MAX crashes, we've seen sort of a revolving door of executives. And yet I still don't feel like, and if you look at this report, that they have their hands around, what exactly is wrong here with the culture. And part of it, just to go back to your initial point about, they're saying the right things now, but we have not ever heard from Boeing top management, we have a culture problem. They've been very reluctant to say that this is some sort of systemic issue. And, the reasons for that are perhaps obvious when you're talking to analysts and investors. But I do think, addressing this problem starts with calling it out and accepting it and really being willing to get your hands dirty and dig in and figure out how you solve this.
Well, regulators seem to have attempted here, just to give some details on what they found. Constant changes to complex procedures and trainings leading to confusion. Other shortcomings hindered the average employee's understanding of their role and how Boeing manages safety. I mean, this is pretty basic. And then it said that regulators requested information that Boeing could demonstrate commitment to safety because the materials it received, quote, did not provide objective evidence of a foundational commitment to safety that matched Boeing's descriptions. Can Dave Calhoun remain at the head of a company where you have this type of scathing description from U.S. regulators trying to understand why there have been repeated errors and repeated incidents?
I think you have to think about the incentives of the different players here. And I think what makes Boeing so unique is that it exists in a duopoly, that you are never really going to have the type of accountability at Boeing that you might have at another company, simply because the world cannot exist just with Airbus airplanes. You do have some planes coming out of China, out of COMAC, which had a pretty impressive showing at the Dubai Air Show, but you're just never going to see the Western world buy those planes. And we just cannot live in a world where there is only Airbus. And so I think, you've seen customers come out and be a lot more aggressive in their criticism of Boeing in the wake of the Alaska Airlines incident. But at the end of the day, they also want their airplanes. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see just how much pressure there ultimately is on Boeing to change its ways, because I think you could argue that in the wake of the MAX incidents, there wasn't enough pressure, or certainly Boeing didn't feel it, for the FAA to now be able to come out with a report like it just did.
The CEO will be sitting down with the head of the FAA today. What do you expect? Anything tangible to come from that, Brooke?
I think it'll be interesting to see how much they actually share about what's discussed in that meeting. I think, if Dave Calhoun wants to show that he's taking this seriously, they should come out with something tangible. And it needs to be real. I mean, we've heard about changes from Boeing ways in which they've improved their safety culture. I think it needs to go beyond that. I think you need to really get specific and talk about how you're going to address some of these issues that were raised in the FAA report. I mean, I think that's what they should do. Now, how much they'll actually talk about changes that they're making or what was discussed, we'll have to see.